So no, yeah, we won't be recording any interactions or questions from the audience, just that this will be the only recorded section. So Joeri, why don't you tell everybody a little bit of the story of how you came to explore this topic of wonder?
Yes, thank you, Dave. And I also feel conscious I haven't said anything yet. So hi, everyone.
Oh, I didn't introduce you properly.
That's fine. I mean, I know some people, and there's some people I don't know. Also, maybe just saying I'm based in Amsterdam, for those who don't know. And like Jeff, who has Ted wanting to jump in, I have a daughter who is in the hallway, and she just figured out to open doors. So who knows, she'll show up halfway, but let's see. Hopefully she stays there. Yeah, Dave, thank you for the invitation to do this session, and also the question, wonder, why wonder? Yeah, where do I start? I think Jeff mentioned already a bit my morning practice of doing morning walks. I think I started doing these walks, and then only later I discovered that it was called wonder. But I started doing these walks. That's maybe the moment to go back to. After I was home for a few months with a burnout, and it was quite a tough moment in my life when, well, yeah, obviously I couldn't work anymore. I wasn't quite sure what I could do. But in those months at home, the one thing I did that really supported me was go for hour-long walks. And after I felt a bit better, or better enough to at least start working again, the big regret I felt was, if I spend all day in an office, I can no longer walk. How can I fit those walks in? Because those were so nourishing, even though it was just in the local park in Amsterdam. And I ended up just trying to get up a bit earlier and walk every morning for 30 minutes. And that was maybe the start of a 5-year-long exploration, really for a doctorate, for doctoral research into wonder and what it could mean. But mostly, I think at that moment in time, I felt such a big, really deep need to reconnect to my own sense of wonder. And that had so many layers to it. It was reconnecting to nature that I felt such a big longing to. It was reconnecting with lightness, playfulness, with the things that were meaningful for me. But also, maybe we'll get to that later, but wonder isn't just joyous and beauty in my experience. It's also quite a vulnerable position. And later I discovered the word for wonder comes from the same root as the word for wound. And wonder is actually a bit like a wound, in a sense of that you need to be vulnerable and open, and it can feel quite uncomfortable. So also questioning all your stories and assumptions is also a form of wonder, of dwelling in wonder, but not one that's always pretty, but that it emerged for me, that whole search in that time. And then later, more and more questions around wonder emerged, which were more to do with finding beauty and connecting to nature. But first it was, as I think, Jeff, you put it, a sort of narrative wreckage that sort of, I thought, I have no idea where I am or what my story is. And I need to figure out through walking, step by step.
So I think that's interesting that you said wreckage there as a reference from Jeff, but it seems like the burnout was a sort of wound, was an opening or an opportunity. And I was interested in in a way, by practicing, you were kind of, in a way, ruling out some of the accidental aspects of wonder. So could you say a little bit around the practice of opening yourself to wonder on a regular basis. I think this is a kind of critical element of the story that I've heard from you so far. So
yeah, so that moment where I just started was a bit accidental at first, but then I ended up, and also that ended up being one of my main insights from my doctorate, that even though I thought wonder was all about spontaneity and about surprise and about new, that actually discipline and duration and routine was its best friend, for me at least. So I ended up, so walking is one of the things I do. So every morning I ended up for 5 years, I did it super structured, and now still very often. Like the first thing I would do every morning was go out and walk. And not just walk, but that really walk in a special way. So it's a combination of its routine, but it's also ritual, in the sense ritual is, I like the definition where it is from a ritualist, Theo de Haan. She says, if you put a frame around a piece of art, you know how to look, you really look very well. And if you put a frame around a moment, you also sort of really pay attention. So ritual is a way of putting this kind of frame around a moment and to really live it intensely and with extraordinary attention. And I ended up walking in this kind of way. And my practice was that I just let myself walk. And the only intention I had was to take one photograph of something of beauty that called out to me. So that was really important, that I didn't go looking for something of beauty, but something of beauty that called out to me. And my practice was being, or is still, being as open as I can to just to allow that something to call out to me. And I ended up thinking of it as foraging for beauty, from the word foraging, where it literally means to wander off in the wild in search of nourishment or food. And I ended up thinking of all these glimpses of beauty or those photos as kind of nourishment for the soul, or for my well-being. And the funny thing is that even though it was just 30 minutes at the start of each day, after a while, and because I did it every day, it really seeped into the rest of my day and life. And also because every day it was a sort of reminder to wonder, but also an opportunity to wonder. And of course, not every day was something really big happened or something, but that way of looking I ended up thinking of wonder as seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary. And every morning I practiced that. So it's and I used to live mostly in this time in this very city center of Amsterdam, so in the red light district. So there's beauty there, but there's also a lot of tourism and everything going on. But to really practice then in that way of seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary, seeing beauty, and keep at it for such a long moment of time, that was, I think, the biggest difference to me. And I also did other practices, but this is maybe the most tangible, the walking, and the one that made the most difference to me also.
That's fascinating, especially in the middle of the city, which often it's easy to feel under pressure by, or kind of trying to get through and survive the city in a way. And could you give us an example of something, because if you're in a routine and you're walking out every day and you're in the same area, you're going to, you can sort of get into a frame of mind where you don't notice what's there. So there's something about the way that you were paying attention, or the way that you were, it sounds like you weren't seeking something out. Would you say a little bit more and maybe give us an example of something along those lines, of how something ordinary became extraordinary, or you found the extraordinary in the ordinary?
Yeah, sure. And sometimes, so it's also, funnily enough, if you do this more often, I notice I immediately sink into this way of seeing most days. Of course, I'm also human, and I have days when I'm in a rush, or when I when I already start for instance, I noticed that if I had walked past the previous evening along a beautiful tree, and that morning I was already with that image in my head to think, I'm going to take a picture of that tree, the magic was already gone. So it's really a sort of just walk and really pay attention. And after a while, I got better at that. Mm-hmm. And I think we had a little chat before, Dave, you said, but then you walk every day in the same area. How can you still see something extraordinary? But just, I live here in Amsterdam, and there are some canals here behind me, and there's a little bridge, and just that's the first step I take almost from my door on that little bridge. And the sky is different every day. Just if I would just go to that bridge, look out and go back, I think I would already have my moment of seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary, because it's, and I think because you see the same thing every day, you actually become better at seeing the nuance of seeing the different skies or the different seasons, even though you're in the city, the different seasons with blossom coming up or leaves falling. And yeah, very often it's not so grand necessarily. I mean, it's a beautiful sky, or it's a little flower or a little bird. I do tend to look for nature, even though I'm in the city, but you could just as well look for other things. And there are sometimes moments when something a bit, which feels a bit more extraordinary happen. And for instance, I wrote about and shared also previously a moment where I was walking when I was still living in the red light district. I was walking, and then suddenly I was walking alongside a heron. And there are herons in Amsterdam, so it's not necessarily that's totally unusual. But I was walking on this very quiet canal in the old city center of Amsterdam, and suddenly, for a moment, I was completely in step with that heron. And it was walking alongside me, and those were, and yeah, it's almost too difficult to describe, but that was really a moment when it felt like such a deep connection, and like, it's this. The heron is the city morning walker here, and I'm a guest in his city, or we switched perspectives for a moment, and then the moment passed. I did take a picture, and the moment passed, and then this picture ended up on my Dutch essay on wonder on the cover, even though it was taking like a split moment. But those are the rare moments, and I ended up thinking of them as windows in time, when time completely stops and you feel totally interconnected, or moments of magic. And what I think is, if you do practice that wonder and the discipline of wondering every day, then every once in a while, that's worthwhile in itself, but every once in a while, something like this deep connection or this window in time happens. Yeah. And I also learned that you shouldn't go and look for those moments like too directly, like, and now I'm going to encounter another heron like this, or now I'll have another moment. But also, if you don't think it's possible, or if it's not somewhere in your in your awareness, or not as a possibility, it also doesn't happen. So
So I think
a long answer, Dave. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I wanted to return to a comment that Frank was making, partly because I think, the way that you described the experience of defending your PhD and how you were almost rooted in yourself because of the exploration and the practice. And then, we've got the question, not that I believe this question, but I think it's an interesting question to ask you, is, what's the value of wonder in a world that's in such, climate emergency, political emergency, economic emergency? What's the importance relative to these nebulous moments of passing beauty that is part of an individual's inner experience, related to the kind of mass collapse of the world? why would you advocate its importance? Why would you advocate this is still important, if you would?
Yeah, obviously, I ask myself this question quite often, and my doctoral defense or 5.5 was also asked in a way. But yeah, I do think it's important, and especially because all those like climate emergency and people and war and conflict, and I think there are several paths or directions you can work with these big questions over time. But I think one of the routes is a way of, really reconnecting to nature, and especially also questioning our story of what David was saying at the start. Are we part of the world or not? Is the world alive or not? These are theoretical explorations, but I find that through experiencing them in a routine of wonder, or to have those kind of moments, I like the John Schotter, a theoretical thinker. He has this notion of moments that move you, because they touch you, but also that move you ontologically, that move your worldview. And I've had a few of those in my explorations on wonder, because I felt experientially the world is alive. I am part of it. And I think for me, but also for others I see in this area or I work with, that shifts your, if something is alive, if something is something you care for, you immediately care for it, you have a different relationship with it, you have a relationship with it, you are part of it. So especially with relation to, in my thesis, I explored more in relation to the human and the modern human and nature connection, and in the context of climate emergency, how important wonder is. But you could also, I had a few weeks ago, I had a really nice workshop with consultants on wonder, and one of the participants said, I think we have a crisis of wonder, and that's why we have, that's maybe why we have war, or we have so much conflict, because we don't wonder about each other so much. And if wonder is really seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary, or sort of placing question marks behind things that you think are just the way they are, so I think wonder is maybe one of the most important things we can do in these bigger bigger themes. Apart from also, of course, we also need action, and we also need, but at the root of our paradigm, how we look at the world, how we look at each other, wonder can be really important. And I think I'm definitely not new in saying this, because I learned a lot of philosophers have written about wonder or explored wonder. And also if you look at their arguments, I think why it's important, some are saying it's because you live a nicer life as an individual by having more wonder. I can agree with that. But and then the other category is more or less like by wondering, or you sort of, you think more about the other, or you feel a relationship with the other, whether it's human or more than human. So wondering marks the other for your concern. And the third is more like that rare moments of wonder can really shift your paradigm, shift your way of thinking or worldview. And I have experienced all three. And at the same time, I keep noticing how for myself, and also I work a lot in organizations, how arguing for wonder is quite political and difficult. On the one hand, because people say we need to tackle all the big things, but in organizations, for instance, it's like, okay, you wonder, and then how will this help us be more efficient, or help us more productive, or it's quite a intangible, slow process. It's not something that leads to something immediately. If you try to do a little wonder so you can then be more productive, it's, I think, counterproductive to the idea.
Yeah.
So that's sometimes a challenge.
how many metrics on wonder have you set for the organization? It kind of is really counterproductive. We mentioned, you mentioned a lot about connection to self, and we've mentioned a lot about connection to nature, or the phenomenal world, as it were. I'm wondering about wonder in relationship, and whether how your explorations touched upon that, because in a way, my automatic thoughts about wonder are not necessarily about human beings. Not that I don't know some wonderful human beings, but that it's almost, it's often about outstanding, breathtaking experiences in nature that I associate it with. So what would you say about wonder in, between, in all our relations, as it were, or our human relations specifically?
Yeah, funnily enough, I ended up with I started with human relations, and then I ended up more with the more than human myself. But I think wonder can be also, different people have different sources of wonder. So for instance, a few of my colleagues I work with were really surprised, like, oh, you keep talking about nature. Wonder for me is in connection with others. So also that's an interesting exploration in itself. Like, what are your sources of wonder and sources of where you mostly see the wonder? I mean, for some people it's art, for some it's science, for some it's, so that's one way of looking at it. And another way is that this way of seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary is really something you can direct at everything or everyone. And for myself, I noticed that while practicing that in the daily morning walks, it became easier to practice that way of looking also in the teams I work for, in organizations, for instance, or work with. And it's in itself also a little bit intangible, but it manifests in a different way of seeing, and then also automatically you treat people differently. And of course, there's also a difference when I work with a group, a design that I don't, that I create a lot of space for people to bring in their stories. That already helps. So working with stories helps also for me to wonder and to see the wonder or the extraordinary within the ordinary in every person, if you ask for stories or personal stories that matter most. I can.
I think I'll ask you one more question, and then I think we'll close. But so what I'm hearing and what I resonate with most is sort of cultivating our capacity for attention. Some of that comes through practice and commitment and intention. But there's something to me about this kind of openness to one's own ability to refine and pay extraordinary attention to what's happening around, whether it's on the intentional walk or not. So there seems to be some kind of extrasensory capacity, if you like, that allows this openness to the moment, and it could be new, it could be old, but being able to sense and feel it. That's sort of, if I sum up your story so far, how does that strike you, or what would you say about that?
Yes, and I was just thinking also, it now, before you know it, it sounds very individual and very local, and it's not that it doesn't scale up, but it's also that the starting point is different. So I think we spoke about that, Dave, in our conversation, that maybe some of you are familiar with the idea of disenchantment, that the world is disenchanted, there's no longer any magic or wonder, and also other thinkers that have said we need re-enchantment, we need a different story. And at one point I got a bit stuck in that sort of, is there no wonder left, or we need a whole different story for the whole of society? How will we ever get there, and how can I start and contribute in light of all those big questions and issues of our time? And I ended up reading one political philosopher who happened to be the only female political philosopher who wrote about this topic. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, and she had this notion of enchantment by emergence. So she said, enchantment is always, it's not that there's no wonder at all left in the world. There are always moments of wonder and people or places that still hold wonder. And the question is, can you find them and create a new story by resisting that story of disenchantment? Because it has consequences. If you think of the world as dead or alive, it matters. Or if you think of the world as a wondrous place or not. And she said, enchantment by emergence is that you start yourself by creating that different story, by looking in your own world and in your own organization. What are those moments of wonder or people? How can I create a different story? Whereas enchantment by design was the other part. She said there is from high up, from a whole society, or top down from management to create a story of enchantment, which is also wonderful if it works. For instance, in an organization, if you have leadership that supports that and individuals who do that. But even if it's not there, you can still do this individual or find also, I mean, I didn't just do individual, I also found others and created groups of co-inquirers who were working with me, but then you sort of bottom up. You have a bottom up kind of enchantment. And then that's also a way of resisting that story. Yeah.
Well, hopefully today's call is some bottom-up enchantment, because although I'm calling you as an expert, was particularly, I call in experts that I feel have the lived experience of what they're an expert in. It's not just a bunch of knowledge, but actually how the person is living according to what they're bringing into the room. So I think we can... in the next phase, I'm just going to turn the recording off, and